Hello, this is CTech's BiblioTech video series. My name is James Spiro, and I'm joined now with Uri Gneezy. Uri Gneezy is a professor of economics and strategy and the Epstein Atkinson Chair in behavioral economics at the University of California, San Diego, Rady School of Management. Before that, a faculty member at the University of Chicago, Technion, and Haifa. Uri's research focuses on using both lab and field experiments to study how people react to incentives. He's the co-writer of The Y-Axis, WHY, which discussed how using field experiments can improve our understanding of economic interactions in the real world. But today, we're speaking about his latest book release, Mixed Signals, How Incentives Really Work. The book focuses on signals that incentives send and how understanding and framing these signals can increase the effectiveness of incentives. Uri, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, for sure. I'd first like to get into the first question, which is, why did I invite you here today? And why is the time to write this book? What was my incentive? What was your incentive? Why now?
My incentives are easier. I want to sell as many books as I can, right? So that's why I'm here, right? Why did I write the book? That's another question. So that's a lot of intrinsic motivation because if you want to make money, there are other ways, maybe more efficient, and it's a lot of work to write a book, but it's some kind of intrinsic motivation. It makes me feel good about myself. So incentive is definitely not just money. It's also the feeling that I got out of doing this. What are your incentives? That's a good question. You should answer it. I don't know.
My incentives are always an excuse to find people like you to talk to about some of the interesting things like this. Why do people?
Disappointed.
No, we'll see. I'm sure I won't be. You mentioned it about financial incentives. What kind of incentives are there in the world? Most people consider incentives to be financial, or at least that's what we learn about when we're younger. We get rewards, we get treats, we get paid now as adults. What are the forms of incentives that you explore, and what can we maybe examine today?
Right. So incentives is definitely not just what you mentioned. It's definitely not just money. And you mentioned as kids. So as kids, you can get, if you don't do your homework, you might not be able to go out to the playground or something like that. That's also incentive. So punishment is also a form of incentives. Or if you do a good job, I can tell you, great job, James, you did really well. That's also incentive. It's something that really, that could really motivate you. So it's definitely not just money. Money is maybe the easiest in many aspects because it's easy to measure. I cannot measure how much it is if I tell you, James, you did a great job versus James, you did a good job or a fine job. Or it's harder to measure. With money, it's very easy, right? You know how to deal with it. But everything that can affect your behavior is kind of incentive.
Okay, thank you. So I want to understand a bit more about, I understand why people would respond to the incentive itself. Everyone wants a few more pennies in their pocket or a treat after school or, a raise or affirmation. I understand that, but what's the human reaction to incentives? Why do we respond the way we do to them?
So there is the obvious thing that, if you'll offer me money, if you'll tell me, Uri, do you want to help me? I have a new business. I want your help with whatever, putting products on the shelves, and you'll offer me money to do that, then then it's clear why I'm doing this, right? But there are also, so you can take a class in a business school about incentives, and you can study from an economist, and the economist will tell you that you hate going to work, and the only reason that you go to work, the assumption is that the only reason you go to work is to pay the rent, to buy food, to be able to survive. Take the class with the same title, but from psychologists, they'll talk all about the fulfillment and feeling good about yourself and all the softer things that you're there. So you go to work not because you need to pay the rent, but because you want some kind of meaning in life. Those two are really strong men. I don't know about you, but I go to work because they pay me and they need the money, and because I enjoy doing it, and I get some satisfaction from it. And if I'm successful, if at the end of the interview you tell me that I did a good job, I'll feel good about myself. Right? There is a combination. Now, the question that what I'm trying to do with the book is to look at ways to actually, instead of these two being conflicting views, I want to see how it can really help each other. How monetary incentives or any other incentive could actually make you feel better about your job and feeling good about it. Because the starting point is that every incentive contains some kind of signal. I don't know what you think about me or what my employer thinks about me, but once, if my dean will come and tell me, do this, and then she'll be happy with this, that's a kind of incentive for me. That's a signal. The incentive that you'll send will send me a signal about what she expects me to do. And if I'll fulfill what I think she expects me to do, I'll feel good about myself, right? So that will make the signal. The biggest mistake that people do is what you started with, thinking that incentive is just the money that they give you and that's it. No, it also contains information about the interaction.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. You mentioned it about some of the signals, and that's the title of the book, Mixed Signals. One of the things you touch on are the differences between social signaling and self-signaling. Can you explain to me what you meant by those terms and what they are exactly, please?
Let me give you an example. Imagine that you see in a cold morning, you see a neighbor going to the recycle center with a large bag filled with soda cans. She's walking with 100 soda cans to recycle them. What are you going to think about her?
I'd probably think that she's recycling and a good Samaritan to the community.
Exactly. She's a good person, right? That's the social signaling. She's signaling to you that she's a good person. I would feel. She might also feel good about herself because she can say, look, I could have trashed these cans, but I chose to actually recycle them, right? So that's great. So that's the social signaling is what you think, and the self-signaling is her feeling good about what she did. Now, the way this interacts with incentives is that imagine that now the city decides to give you 10 cents for every soda can that you recycle. Exactly the same story. Now you see your neighbor and you say, really, for $10, she collected all this and she's going over there. She's really cheap, right? You changed your perception about the social signal that she sends is very different once there are incentives. And the poor neighbor, she did nothing. It's just the city that decided to bring. And
well, she did more than me.
Yeah, right. Well, you should recycle soda.
I should recycle, yeah.
Yeah, you shouldn't drink soda, but if you do, exactly. It's also the self-signaling. So she's going to feel different about herself. Once there is money, she'll say, well, I'm not doing it just because I'm a good person. I'm doing it also because I'm doing it probably because of the money. And if 10 cents per soda can, it's not worth it. It completely changes the meaning.
Okay, that's really interesting. And it touches on an interesting idea of the self-signaling. It's that people do things for themselves. Now, at what point is that a virtue? At what point is that ego? Well, I mean, we're coming quite abstract areas here, right? Because if it doesn't become, if it's not just a financial reward, it could be, I'm going to do this for what that person thinks of me. Is that still an authentic form of incentive?
So it's, I think that what you're touching on is a very deep philosophical question. So imagine that I give $100 to some charity, to Make-A-Wish Foundation. Now I do it because it makes me feel good about myself. So is this altruism or not? Right? And that's a deep philosophical question that we're not going to resolve it. I think that as an economist, as someone who cares, as long as you gave the money to charity, that's a good outcome in my world, right? You gave, the charity will enjoy it. If you also enjoy it, that's good for you, right? So as an economist, at least, I try to look at the situation in terms of the outcome. Is the outcome a desirable one? That's great. If not, what can we do to change it?
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. I know that there's also a philosophy in charity, which is if you give money anonymously, that's the more virtuous form of charity giving, because you don't get that social signaling. You get only the self-signaling. Anyway, you're right. We're going
philosopher go a step deeper and said, even if it's anonymous, you still feel good that you gave the money, then it's not altruism, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't think we have enough time to go that deep today.
Yeah, no, we don't want to, because we are not going to make sense.
Exactly. Let's keep to making sense, and let's talk about the book itself. What other lessons are there in the book that you extract that could teach us more, maybe from a business point of view? Think of the business leaders out there, or the CEOs, or the folks that work in high pressure business environments. What can they glean from these kinds of insights?
So they should understand that every signal that they sends a signal, and very often the signals are going to be mixed. So I talk in the book about a few of those. You can think about, for example, telling your employees that you really care about quality, but then incentivizing quantity. What you're going to get is that people are going to maximize quantity, and quality is going to suffer. Now, many businesses do it because quantity is usually easier to measure. It's an objective thing, whereas quality is often subjective. But you should know that if you tell your employees you should maximize quality, we really care about quality, but then you incentivize quantity, you're going to get lower quality. If that's what you want, that's good, but that's a mixed signal. Another one is telling your employees they should work in teams and cooperate and work for the company, but then compensate them based on individual incentives, right? So if I give you personal incentives, why would you work as part of the team? As a boss, you should decide what's more important over here. Do I want to get people to really put a lot of individual effort and work on it, or is this kind of job that you need a team? But in any case, don't send the mixed signal. Another one is to tell you that they care about the long run, say that the CEO, but then measure them based on quarterly earnings, right? So that's again a mixed signal. I can tell you that as board, we care about the long run, but in reality, you know that you're going to be measured based on very short-term incentives, and you're going to react to this, right? And there are many others that you can think about, but maybe the two lessons that are really important. The first one is use common sense. That's just think about the problem, think about the incentives. What's the message that you're sending? That's really important. And the second is that you should always test what you do. So do some kind of A/B testing to see whether your intuition about how your incentives are going to work is actually correct. In many cases, you're going to have strong intuition. You'll go to run the test, the A/B test, and you'll find out that your intuition was wrong, or that people learned how to game the system. People are really creative at gaming the system. So that could be.
Yeah, no, it's super important to be able to make sure that the signals that you send out aren't mixed and that are kind of aligned. What advice would you give to those who may be receiving mixed signals, maybe from an employer or a board member who may not be making much linear sense, or maybe a family member, or what would you say to the receptors of those signals? How can they best challenge, or how can they best interpret and overcome some of those challenges?
So in some cases, because I'm an annoying person that cares so much about incentives, I can tell my dean, look, that doesn't make sense. You tell us that you want us to publish good papers, and then you're rewarding us per paper or something like that. So you can tell your employer, just make it, look, you just sent me, I'm confused. What is it that you want me to do? Do you want me to really care about, customer service? Imagine that you work in a call center and you are paid per call that you answer. It's clear what's going to happen. You're going to be very quick, much quicker than otherwise, but the quality is going to go down. So, for example, people will call again later. You will not solve the problems and things like that, right? As an employee in a place like this, I would really ask the boss, look, what do you care about? I'm confused, right? So make sure that you tell it. In many cases, we don't understand that we are confused. Most people who don't think about incentives as their day job don't even understand that they got mixed signals. But if you do, just surface it.
One of the incentives you mentioned, you kind of, it just reminded me now of the e-scooters in the cities that people are riding. First of all, they're super dangerous anyway. I think everyone knows someone who's fallen off one, but I'm so interested in the incentive pattern there, because the pricing pattern is done by time and not by distance, which means that if you're incentivized to increase your speed, to reduce your price, to reduce your time. Yeah. So I feel like that's an example where you could change the incentive to make it it's cost per kilometer, for example, instead of cost per minute. Maybe then people will be acting a bit safer. They'll be more likely to stop at traffic lights or generally just slow down. That's my own personal.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think that what you said is a great example of the wrong signal. In general, I don't agree with what you said at the beginning. So you made it sound as if scooters are bad. I don't ride them because I'm too scared, but in general, in cities, all these electric bike and electric scooters are amazing, right? They can really solve. The problem is the way people actually use them.
Right.
right?
No, I
So
wasn't saying that the scooters themselves are bad. I'm saying that the
right.
incentives that are being
Yes.
deployed are
Yes.
dangerous incentives, or could be dangerous
Right.
incentives.
Right. So if everyone rides on the right lane and safely with the helmet, and that, you take a car, every scooter takes a car off the road, that's great. Problem is the way people actually ride them, and maybe incentives can help with this, right? So incentives could be, in this case, enough policing that people don't ride too fast, don't ride without helmets, don't ride. I spend lots of time in Tel Aviv. Don't ride like crazy, right? There's no other interpretation than crazy, as if they have no value to life. That's so enforcement is one of them. Maybe education is another one. Definitely the pricing that you mentioned. If I pay you per minute, and that what it does is that you don't stop in red light because you don't want to pay more money. That's not smart.
Yeah. It's going to be the message for my mayor campaign whenever the election is. I'm kidding. Thank you. I want to talk a bit about the one last thing you mentioned in the book I want to talk about, which is the pay to quit strategy. That caught my attention. What is that exactly, to those who may not have heard of it?
So if you ask people, do they like where they work, most of the people will say yes. And it's important because if you don't say yes, then your value to the company is lower. So if I come to work just because I have to and I really hate my work, I'm not going to be as good of a worker as otherwise. And in particular, so if I can measure your output, if you work in something that I can easily measure your output, that's less of a problem. But in many cases, like my job, maybe your job, many of the jobs out there, it's harder to measure the output, especially in the short run. So you need to have motivated employees, and if the employee doesn't like where they work, they're going to be the value to the company is going to be lower. But just asking them, "Are you happy here?" is not going to work because they'll say yes. They don't want to lose their job. Maybe. Now, instead of just asking them, you can use money in order to figure out what they really care about. So imagine that I come to you and tell you, James, we value your work. We want you to stay, but in case you are not very happy and you want to leave, here's, I don't know, $10,000. You can leave on September 1st, and we can depart as friends. We appreciate the time that you spend with us. We hope you won't take it, but if you want to leave, this way you can actually select and weed out the people that are not very happy with their job, right? So you can feel about yourself, anyway, look, I was thinking about moving, and okay, then leave. That's fine. That's not too much. Another advantage of this is that if you decide to stay, then you'll have to convince yourself that you didn't make a mistake, right? You just gave up $10,000. You need to justify it to yourself, right? So that's an additional benefit.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. That's super interesting. I had a follow-up question, which was, in those incentives, I imagine you did tests, right, to examine all of that. Did you
Sure.
When you did that, did you notice any difference between maybe males and females, or age groups, or seniority of positions? What were some of those insights?
In general, with incentives or with the pay to quit?
I suppose both, but but first for
Right.
the
So with the pay to quit, it's kind of we started something. COVID happened, so we don't have the results that we want. We have some anecdotal result, but I think that the idea itself is very interesting. In general, there are differences between people, definitely. So again, in Israel, people are competitive and aggressive, maybe, and then you go to Thailand, people being aggressive is considered really bad, or competition could be considered bad, right? So maybe in some places you want to have more competitive, more aggressive kind of competition. In other places you don't, depending on the culture. That could be even within a city. I live in San Diego, so in the city, the culture is not just between San Diego and Tel Aviv, it's also between professors and taxi drivers and doctors and lawyers and teachers. Every group has different kind of culture, and you should adopt incentives to this. The signals that you send, if I'll curse during negotiation between union, maybe that would be okay. If I'll do it with teachers, that would be really bad, right? So you need to know the culture in which how aggressive you can be, how the competitive your incentives should be, how much people care about now versus later. So those are all important. There are also gender differences. So we know, for example, from the literature that women are more risk averse, meaning that if the more risky your incentives are, they might work better on men than on women. Women also, in general, of course, we're talking about averages and distributions. Women also tend to be less competitive. So the more competitive the incentives, the more men you'll have in the job and things like that. So there are individual differences for sure.
Wow, that's super interesting. I want to let my last question before we wrap up. How can we equalize that, or should it be equalized? Is that something that, are the differences there something that need to be addressed, or is that just human nature and that's kind of who we are as a people?
So that's my new book kind of thing. So in many cases, especially if you think about gender differences, in many cases we try to, so that the workplace was created by men, for men, sometimes after World War II, the workplace as we know it now. And many of the things are just not needed, but favor men. So you can think about the temperature in the room, right? We have higher metabolism than women. We like the temperature to be a bit lower. And you go to offices, very often the temperature is such that men feel fine with it and women are freezing. That's not about incentives, but that's something that could explain maybe other things. So for example, my daughter is a software engineer. And the job interview that she had was half an hour over Zoom with 3 people watching her trying to solve within half an hour a problem with the code. She got the job. The job itself had nothing to do with time pressure. She gets
or people staring.
Yeah. Or people staring at her, exactly.
Yeah,
right?
quite frightening.
So she has 2 weeks to solve a ticket and no one is staring at her and she can ask people and she can talk with people. So the point is that you should not make the selection process in this case more under more time pressure or more stressful than the job itself. If you are trying to get a fighter pilot, they need to perform really well under pressure. A software engineer usually doesn't. So make sure that the incentives that you give during the interview, during the selection process is not different than what the job itself is.
Okay, that's great advice. Thank you so much. And we got a sneak peek at the next book, which I guess you'll be working on. But for now, we've been talking about mixed signals, how incentives really work. The book came out earlier this year. Uri, my final question, where can we get a copy?
Amazon, bookstores.
Amazon? Great, cool. You heard it. You heard it here first. Uri, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been a pleasure to learn more about the book and the incentives behind our society and what makes us do the things we do. And I look forward to all of the future updates with all of your work.
Perfect. Thank you very much. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.